Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this month's Patch Tuesday webinar by Managing. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for taking time off your busy schedules and joining in. Now, before we can move on any further, let's have a quick audio and a video check. If you can hear me and view the presentation clearly, please let us know via chat. Ladies and gentlemen, if you can clearly hear my voice and view the presentation, please let us know via chat or via thumbs up. Thank you for your lovely responses. So let's begin. Here's a quick intro about me. I am Anupam Kundu, a product specialist at Managing. Today, I'll be your presenter, and I'm also assisted by an expert panel who would be answering all your queries throughout the webinar. So if you have any queries regarding the webinar, the presentation, or our products, please feel free to ask. All right. So this is going to be a quick 45-minute session followed by a question and answer session. Also, this webinar is being recorded and the recording would be made available on our Manage Engine's website in 1 to 2 working days. With that, we'll now have a look at the agenda of today's webinar. First of all, we'll discuss the latest cybersecurity news that made the headlines across the world. Next, we'll have a detailed breakdown of Microsoft's Patch Tuesday updates. Followed by that, we'll be discussing the impacts and effects that these vulnerabilities can have if left unpatched. After that, we'll be sharing some of the best practices for patch management that you can use to secure the hybrid networks. And last of all, we'll have a question and answer session wherein our expert panel would be answering all your queries. All right, so let's start with the cybersecurity news. Now, the need for cybersecurity requires no introduction. With rising cyber attacks being constant, admins have no choice but to be vigilant at all times. With that in mind, let's have a look at the top cybersecurity news that made the headlines. First up, we have reports of threat actors deploying the Mirai botnet malware by exploiting the Spring4 shell vulnerability. Now, the incidents have been reported majorly in the Singapore region. So, as a quick recap, most of you know that the Spring4 shell vulnerability is a critical vulnerability arising in the Spring framework, and this can potentially cause remote code execution. Speaking of the CVSS score, the vulnerability has been assigned a CVSS score of 9.8 and is being tracked by the CVE code, CVE ID, CVE 2022222965. Now, speaking of Mirai, it is a malware that in fact infects smart devices that run on the ARC processors, and then it turns them into a network of remotely controlled bots. Now, this network of bots, called a botnet, is often used to launch DDoS or distributed denial of service attacks. By leveraging this Spring4 shell vulnerability, the threat actors can download the Mirai sample to the temp folder and execute them after changing permission using the chmod command. Now, to mitigate the Spring4 shell vulnerability, the users are suggested to upgrade to the latest versions of Spring Framework, that is versions 5.3.18 and 5.2.20 or greater. Moving on to the next news. So we can see that Nginx has released the mitigations for the zero-day bug that has been affecting the LDAP reference implementation. So what happened was that on the 9th of April 2022, a zero-day vulnerability in Nginx was leaked briefly in the public domain. Now, as per the official comments by Nginx, the vulnerability doesn't affect Nginx open source and Nginx Plus. I would like to repeat that the vulnerability doesn't affect Nginx open source and Nginx Plus as per the official comments. So it only affects the reference implementation, which uses the LDAP to authenticate the users. Now, dear guests, please note that the vulnerability impacts the module only if the deployment involves any of the following criteria. So the criteria are: first, command line parameters to configure the Python-based reference implementation daemon. Second, unused optional configuration parameters. And lastly, specific group membership to carry out LDAP authentication. Now, speaking of the mitigations, Nginx has mentioned 3 ways. You can read more about them from the Nginx blog, and the link to the blog will be added to the chat shortly. All right, so with that, we come to the end of the latest cybersecurity news. Now, let's take a look at Microsoft support and Windows lifecycle. So as you can see on your screen, the active support date and the security support date for Windows 10 version 1909 for enterprise and education will be ending on the 10th of May 2020. Similarly, for Windows 10 version 20H2 for Home, Pro, and Pro for workstations, the active support and the security support ends on the 10th of May 2022. So users who are still on these old versions, kindly migrate to newer versions, that is Windows 10 version 21H1 or Windows 11. Now, let's discuss about the 0 days that have been patched this month. So we can see that a total of 2 0 days have been patched this month. Digging into the details, first one, we see the first 0-day bug in Windows User Profile Service. All right. And ladies and gentlemen, please note that this is publicly disclosed and is being tracked by the CVE ID 2022-26904. Now do note that this is an actively exploited vulnerability, and this privilege elevation bug was discovered by CrowdStrike and the US National Security Agency. Speaking of the second 0-day bug, we can see this occurring in the Windows Common Log File System driver. This is yet again another publicly disclosed vulnerability and can cause elevation of privilege in the vulnerable systems. Talking about the CVE ID, we can see that it is being tracked by the CVE 2022-24521. Now, since the vulnerabilities have been disclosed publicly, it is expected that the threat actors will analyze them for further exploitation. Hence, we strongly recommend you to install these updates as soon as possible. Moving on, let's take a look at the critical vulnerabilities that have been patched this month. So a total of 10 critical vulnerabilities have been patched. We can see that 3 of these have occurred in Windows Hyper-V, while the other 2 in Windows LDAP and Microsoft Dynamics 365 on-premises. Also, note that all of these vulnerabilities can cause remote code execution in the vulnerable systems. I'm pausing for a while so that you guys can take a note of this or screenshot. Okay. So speaking about the next set of critical vulnerabilities, we see that 2 of these have been occurring in Windows Network File System, the others in Windows SMB, Server Service, Procedure Call Runtime. Also to note that all of these vulnerabilities can cause remote code execution in the vulnerable systems. Pausing for a while so that you guys can take a note again. Okay, moving on. So discussing about the total number of patches that were released this month so far, we can see that total of 444 patches were released, and we are glad to announce that all of these patches are supported by ManageEngine's patch management applications such as Desktop Central, Patch Manager Plus, and Vulnerability Manager Plus. Now let's have a detailed breakdown of the Patch Tuesday for April. So we can see that a total of 117 vulnerabilities were mitigated by 121 patches and 45 updates. Also note that these 117 vulnerabilities can have 5 different impacts on the vulnerable systems. For the classifying, we'll see that Windows has reported 139 vulnerabilities, while in Microsoft Office, we see 6 vulnerabilities and just 1 in Microsoft.NET. Now, classifying the patches by impact, we see that 52 of these patches of these vulnerabilities can cause elevation of privilege while 46 can cause remote code execution. Followed by this, we have vulnerabilities impacts such as information disclosure, denial of service, and spoofing. Here's a classification of the patches by severity. So we see that 89.8% of all these vulnerabilities have been rated as important, and 7.6% are critical. And just 2.6% of these are moderate, that has been depicted by the green. All right, let's take a look at the operating system and the applications that have been patched. So we can see that updates have been released for Microsoft Windows, Office, and .NET. Let's discuss them in detail. So speaking of Microsoft Windows, we can see that the vulnerabilities have been rated as critical, moderate, and important. Now, the failure to patch these vulnerabilities can cause remote code execution, elevation of privilege, information disclosure, denial of service, and spoofing. Speaking about the CVIDs, this is quite a long list. So here are the CVIDs found in the Microsoft Windows vulnerabilities. The ones that have been highlighted are the critical updates, the critical vulnerabilities. I'll pause for a while so that you guys can take a screenshot of it. Waiting. All right, moving on to the next slide. We have some other vulnerabilities, and here are the CVIDs. Do note that the ones that have been highlighted are the critical ones. All right, here's the third list. All right, so a total of 139 vulnerabilities have been reported. So this is quite a long list. And also the one that has been highlighted is a critical vulnerability. Okay, finally to the end of the list. And these are the other CVIDs of the vulnerabilities. Here we have just one that is critical and has been highlighted. Pausing so that you guys can take a screenshot. Okay, moving on now. Let's discuss the Microsoft Office vulnerabilities. So we can see that these have been rated as important and can cause remote code execution, information disclosure, and spoofing if left unpatched. Speaking of the CVIDs, we see that a total of 6 CVIDs have been released and none of them are critical, as earlier mentioned. Talking about the .NET vulnerability, we see just one important vulnerability that can cause denial of service if left unpatched. And here's the CVID of this. Also, as I mentioned earlier, this is not a critical vulnerability, but has been rated as important. Here is the list of the third-party updates for Windows. Now we can find the entire list of these third-party updates in Manage Engine's Patch Tuesday blog. Here are some other applications that have been updated. We can see quite popular applications such as Adobe, Google Drive File Stream, as well as Google Chrome. Taking a look at the third-party updates for Mac, I'd like to let you know again that you can find the entire list of these third-party updates right from Manage Engine's Patch Tuesday blog. And also, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to let all of you know that if you have any queries regarding the webinar and the presentation, please feel free to ask it to our expert panel via chat. Now, talking about the non-security office updates, we see that updates have been released for Microsoft Project 2016 and Microsoft Office 2016. So with that, we have come to the best practices for patching in a distributed network. So we know that vulnerabilities are constantly on the rise. Now, as a fact, a total of 10,409 vulnerabilities were reported till the end of July 2021. So it's such an alarming rise. This only reflects the dire need for patching to protect the endpoints in a network. With that being said, let's have a look at the best practices for patching in a hybrid network. First up, we have the test and approval. So always test the patches before deploying them to your production machines. Now, as a thumb rule, your test group always should ensure that it has all the Linux, all the flavors and versions that you're using in your network. So I'd like to repeat again that always ensure that the test group has all the versions and flavors of the computers that you're using in your environment. So always test the patches in the test group before deploying. Next, always prioritize the security and the critical updates for the machines. Now, all other updates, such as the optional packs, or let's say feature packs, or let's say some vulnerabilities or updates that have been rated as less severe, we can deploy them through regular patching deployment schedules. Number 3, always try to synchronize the patching schedules with the monthly patch Tuesdays. Now, what happens is that by syncing the patching schedules with the monthly patch Tuesday updates, you can ensure that the patches are tested, approved, and deployed as soon as they are released. So this gives you a head start for achieving patch compliance in your networks. Number 4, always choose broad deployment windows for the remote machines and make sure that the office machines are being updated and the deployment is being done only during non-business hours, especially for the servers. So this has to be done to ensure that no productivity drop occurs in the organization. And last of all, but not certainly the least, always allow the users to postpone the reboots and deployments. Now, what happens is that in many a time, we find that users are held up with some critical tasks, some critical business issues, critical business tasks, and now then forcing them to deploy and reboot the system would cause grave unproductivity. We all know that, and we definitely don't want that. So for that, always allow the users to postpone the deployment and reboots. All right. So with that, we're done with the best practices for patching. Now let's take a look at this graph. As I was saying earlier, so this is a survey from 2019 to July 2021. On your screens, you can see that a total of 10,409 vulnerabilities have been reported in 2021. So this alarming rise just tells us the need for patching our endpoints as soon as possible. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look at deploying the patches and updates using Patch Manager Plus. So if you're using Desktop Central or Vulnerability Manager Plus, you can still deploy the patches seamlessly, as the patching module is same in all of these 3 products. Now, first step, as I already mentioned, the first step is to always test the patches in a pilot group of systems before deploying them to the production machines. So always remember that the pilot group must have all the versions and flavors of the operating systems that are being used in the network. So let's take a look at the testing and approval of patches by heading out to our console. Okay, so this is the Patch Manager Plus console. And as you can see, I'm using the version 10.1.2137.12. So this is how the homepage looks. We have the latest security news, the system health graph, the network patch status. We've also listed the patches by severity and vulnerability. So if you click on the latest security news, it takes you directly to our Manage Engine pit stop and also the logs. You can find all the updates of the applications that have been patched and also the Patch Tuesday updates for this month. Coming back, let's see the testing and approval. For that, we'll click on deployment from the top menu, and then we'll click on test and approve from the left pane. So here you can see that test group has already been created. So let's create a new group by clicking on add group. Now the first step is to define a task. So you can see that we offer 3 platforms, that is Windows, Mac, and Linux. So you can test your Windows patches in Windows platform, your Mac patches in Mac platform, and your Linux patches in Linux platform. Now we'll have to select the group. We can either select the group from the drop down, or we can create a new group. So let's create a new group. We'll click on create custom groups, and this is loading. And so here you can find the list of the custom groups that have already been created. Let's click on create new group. So first we'll be entering the group name. I'll say April PT group. Okay, you can add a description if you want. Now, for selecting the category, always ensure that the group is either static or static unique and never dynamic. Now, what happens if you choose a dynamic test group? So what happens is that a dynamic test group is always based on some criteria. So here, if we choose the operating system equals, and let's go to Microsoft sorry for that, Microsoft Windows 11. Okay, so what happens is that this dynamic group would be based on the criteria that operating system is equal to Microsoft Windows 11. So any new Windows 11 system that is being added to your network will automatically be added to this test group. And we definitely don't want that, right? So we'll stick to static. Okay, choosing the category as static, coming down, and we'll just list the computers, import the computers to the test group. I'm choosing random computers. You can do as per your needs, and we'll click on save. So you can see that April PD group has been created successfully. Okay, coming back. So I was saying that we can create custom groups using the create custom groups button. I'll be choosing a pre-built group that I have created earlier. We'll go with April group. All right. Next, the second step is to choose the deployment option. So first you can choose the Microsoft updates based on their severities. You can choose critical, important, and other update severities. And choose critical and important for the non-security updates as well as feature packs. You can obviously choose as per your needs. I'm choosing as per the demo suggests. And also here you can see that you can either choose to patch all the applications, or you can choose to patch specific applications, or you can patch all the applications except a few that you can list right here. Going with patching all applications, we'll be choosing the updates for the third parties also. So critical and important, I'm going with these. Also, you can choose the antivirus updates and the driver updates. So a list of the entire antivirus updates that we offer is listed right here. Also, do note that this is only available only for Windows systems. All right. The next step is to choose the deployment criteria. So here you can deploy the patches after n number of days from vendor release. I'll be going with 3. So this essentially means is that I'll be choosing to deploy the patches after 3 days from vendor release. Now we choose a deployment policy. You can choose a deployment policy from the drop down, or you can create or modify a new policy. All right. The next step is the notification setting, and this is an optional setting. So if you want to enable notifications, you just enable the checkbox and you put in the email addresses where you want to be notified about the testing and approval. And if you have already configured the mobile app, you can select the technicians that need to be notified. Okay. And the last step is to choose the approval mode for the tested patches. So by clicking on this, you can choose the automatically approval of tested patches after n number of days. So let's go with 2. So this basically means is that I choose to automatically approve the tested patches after 2 days. Okay, and now we click on create. So you can see that our April group that I created just now has been done. All right. Okay. Now let's go back to our presentation. So we'll have a look at another feature, that is the Patch Tuesday based deployment of the automated patch deployment tasks. To have a look at that, heading back to our console, our Patch Manager Plus console, we come to deployment. And now I'd like to let all of you know that automated patch deployment is a 2-step process. First, we create a deployment policy, and then we associate the deployment policy to an automated patch deployment task. So we'll choose the deployment policies from the left pane. There is a list of the policies that have already been created. We'll click on create policy. Let's configure this. We'll say April deployment policy. All right, you can put in a description if you want, clicking on save. Now, the first option is to choose the split type. So if you choose the regular split, what happens is that the weeks are listed as first and second and third. You can also choose the days. You can also choose the deployment window. Try to keep it as broad as possible. And next, if you choose the based on Patch Tuesday split, let's show what happens. So this is an exclusive feature that ManageEngine's patch management solutions provide. So by clicking on the based on Patch Tuesday split, the weeks would be listed based on the Patch Tuesday. So we'll be choosing the first, second, and third week. We'll leave the Patch Tuesday week for testing and approval. We can also choose the dates. Let's go with Monday, Tuesday, definitely a weekend. And for the deployment window, we'll try to keep it as broad as possible. Let's say this. Okay. You can add more than one schedules by clicking on Add More Schedules button. Next step is to download the patches from the server to agent. So you can either choose to download the patches from the server to the agent only during the deployment window or anytime the agent contacts the server. But do note that in the second option, the deployment will be done only during the deployment window. Going with the second option. Now coming to the last step, it's initiate deployment at either the system startup, the refresh cycle, or either of these, whichever happens earlier. Okay, clicking on save and continue. Now we come to the next step. All right, the pre-deployment activities. Ladies and gentlemen, I guess we are having a audio issue again. All right. Yeah, we are having a lot of audio issues. I'm sorry for these inconveniences. All right. Okay. So where was I? Okay, I was talking about the pre-deployment activity. All right. So we'll be choosing wait on LAN, or you can also choose pre-deployment reboot, or you can also choose the custom scripts option. So that just went away. Okay. So what happens with this custom script? So let's say that you want a customized function to happen to the endpoint before the deployment. Let's say that you want to terminate a particular task or a particular problem before in the endpoints before the deployment is about to happen. In that case, you can choose a custom script. You can build a custom script and add that to the script repository, and then you can choose. We'll be going with pre-deployment reboot now. Okay. Here you can see that you can choose to exclude the reboot for the machines that don't require a reboot and also for servers. And if you want to notify the users about the reboot, you can just check in the box. Clicking on save and continue. Let's hide this. Okay. Clicking on save and continue. Coming to the third step, that is pre-deployment user notification. So if you want to notify the users about the deployment, just click on the box and then you can add some custom messages. You can also choose the notification timeout. If you want the users to be able to skip the deployment, you can check the box. And if you want the deployment progress to be shown to the client systems, you can check the last box. Clicking on save and continue. Now we come to the post-deployment activities. So this is basically the same as the pre-deployment activities. The only difference is that these activities happen after the deployment is complete. You can choose to reboot or shut down, or you can choose the custom scripts. And do note that the possibilities are endless with Manage Engine's custom script option. Okay, going with that, and we click on save and continue. So clicking on save and continue. All right. So this gives you a detail of the deployment policy that you just created. You have the deployment schedule, the pre-deployment settings, the post-deployment settings, and all the data, all the details that you need. So let's click save and continue. Okay. All right. So the policy April DP has been created. Okay. Now, as I said earlier, this is a two-step process, the automated patch deployment. The first step is to create a deployment policy that we just did. And the second step would be to add it to an automated patch deployment task. Coming to this, we'll click on automate patch deployment from the left pane. To create a new task, we'll click on automate task. I'll choose Windows. You can also choose Linux or Mac as per your requirements. You can name the task if you want. I won't be renaming it. And then we'll be adding the security updates for Microsoft as well as the non-security updates. Obviously, you can choose as per your needs. Going with the third-party updates. You can also choose the antivirus updates and driver updates. But do note that, as I already said, this feature is available only for Windows. Now, the last step is to deploy the patches after n number of days, either from approval or vendor release. So if I go with, let's say, 4, this means that I want the patches to be deployed 4 days from the release or 4 days from the approval. So I'll go with approval. So this means that the patches will be deployed 4 days after the approval. Now click on next. Here you can add the deployment policy. I've already created deployment policies. I'll go with any one of those. And you can see the deployment policies details right here. You can also choose to create or modify a policy by clicking on create or modify policy. If you want to suspend the task after n number of days, or let's say after a particular date, you can click on the checkbox and then put in the date and the time. Clicking on next. Now the step 3 is to define the target. So you can choose the remote office, local office where you want the deployment to happen. So I'll be going with the local office. And you can also choose to filter out certain targets, certain systems from the domain or OU or the group by using the exclude target feature. Okay. Clicking on next, and the last step is to configure the notifications. Now you can choose to notify about the download deployment and the download failure for these after every n number of hours. You can also attach detailed reports for the failures. As you can see, we offer the reports in 3 different formats, that is PDF, CSV, and XLSX. You can put in the email IDs wherein you'd like to be notified. And if you have already configured the mobile application, as I said earlier, you can just choose in the technicians. And we click on save. All right, as you can see that the task has been automated patch deployment task has been created successfully. All right, going back to our presentation. So to quickly sum up, the creation of an automated patch deployment task consists of 4 stages. First, you select the applications based on the severity. Next, you choose the deployment policy. You can choose the regular split or also manage engines exclusive patched user split. Number 3, you can define the targets, and you can also choose to exclude targets based on the organizational unit or the computer or the domain through the filter. And the last step is to configure the notifications. Okay. Now, dear guests, let's have a look at some of the other exclusive features that Manage Engine's patch management solutions offer to ensure seamless patching. We'll begin with filtering out Patch Tuesday updates. Now we can directly filter the updates released on Patch Tuesday right from the console. So for that, we'll head back to the console. We'll click on patches from the top menu, and we'll choose supported patches from the left pane. So while this is loading, once this loads, you can see all the supported patches that will be supported in your network. So for the filter creation, we click on filters, and then we create a new filter using the plus button. You can choose to rename the filter if you want. Now choosing the release date, we'll choose the first column, that is the condition. We'll go with the release date, and the criteria would be is, and we can add in the custom date. All right. So adding the custom date, that was on 13th of April 2022. So the filter says release date is equal to 13th of April 2022. We click on apply, and you can see that the filter has been applied successfully. And these are the supported patches in your environment that were released in this Patch Tuesday. Now you can also choose this filter if you want to see the missing patches in your environment that were released in the Patch Tuesday updates. And for that, you can again follow the same steps, that is creating a new filter by clicking on the plus button. Okay. Coming back, let's talk about yet another feature, that is declining of patches. Now, many a time, what happens is that there arises the need to decline certain applications. Now, let's say you don't want to deploy less critical patches to your machines, but if you choose to ignore them, it will eventually affect the system health compliance. Also, certain applications running on other software such as Java might be unsupported with the latest updated version. So for scenarios like these, Patch Manager Plus brings the exclusive decline patches feature. Let's take a look at that. Moving to our console yet again. All right, we'll choose the decline patch option from the left pane. You can find that from the patches by clicking the patches option at the top menu and then choosing the decline patch from the left pane. So here are the groups that have already been created to decline patches. We'll create a new group by clicking on select group and decline patch button. Now the first step is to choose the target. You can either choose the target, that is the group, from the drop down, or you can choose to make a new group using the plus button. I already showed you how to create a custom group. Going with the April PD1 group, I've already created this. All right. You have the description has already been added, decline for demo. You can add descriptions as per your choice. Clicking on next. Now you can choose to decline patches, applications, and entire families. So let's show you how to decline the patches. We click on the add patches button. And now you can list and select the entire patches that you want to be declined. I'm going with some random patches. I sincerely hope you don't do that. Adding that. For declining the entire applications, you click on the Applications tab and Add Applications by clicking on the Add Applications button. Let's decline 7-zip, Bitwarden. All right, we'll be adding them to the list. And lastly, you can also choose to decline the families of patches. Click on Family and then Add Family to decline. All right, let's go with Adobe Air and Adobe Flash Player. All right, adding them. All right. So now the third step is to look at the summary details. So you can see that a total of 8 patches and 2 applications and 4 families have been declined for Windows, and this one for Mac. This I have done by mistake. Anyways, so we can see that a total of 8 patches, 2 applications, and 4 families have been declined for Windows. Okay, clicking on Save. And then we can see that the declined patches have been added successfully to the group April PT1. Okay. Coming back to the presentation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, with that, we come to the end of our session. On our screen, you can see the offerings that ManageEngine offers. We have our flagship product, Desktop Central, which is a unified endpoint management and security solution. We also have a MSP version for the product. We have Patch Connect Plus that smoothly integrates with SCCM and Intune to ensure third-party patching. You can use Vulnerability Manager Plus to scan and mitigate the vulnerabilities and compliance issues in your network. And lastly, we have Patch Manager Plus, our standalone patch management solution to ensure seamless patching across the network. Dear guests, now we'll be taking in questions. So if you have any queries and questions regarding the webinar and our products, please feel free to ask them.